Good morning, class. Today we are studying together Robert Louis Stevenson. As you can see in the first slide, I will upload you the slides on the register, but you can see here from the first slide that normally when we talk about Louis Stevenson, we talk about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is mainly considered the greatest work of art, the greatest novel he wrote. Looking at his life, we can see that, he was born in Edinburgh, so he is Scottish writer. He was born in 1850, and the family was born in was a middle-class family, was the typical English family, the typical English class of the Victorian age. He had a particular childhood because he suffered from tuberculosis, so he spent most of his childhood at home, also because he was not helped by the weather in Edinburgh. And during his life, differently from his childhood, he tried to travel a lot. And as you can see at the end of the slide, he settled in Samoa, and he died, as I had already told you, he died there, so in a completely different country, which was particularly beneficial for his health. He traveled a lot, and we can say that he wrote in a particular way because some of his novels are completely different, the opposite. Think that he was also the author of The Treasure Island, which is completely a different novel from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. As you can see, he published first Treasure Island in 1883, and later, a few years later, he wrote and published his masterpiece, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. What you have to notice in the title of this novel is that, as I demonstrated in class, also in the title of the novel, we have an indication about the main content of the story. In fact, we find je kill, which is we can say a use of French word je, and the deformation of the word kill in English. So, io uccido, and then I hide, nascondo, okay. What does it mean? That the main idea and the main, we can say, content of the story is to demonstrate that human nature has a double identity. So human beings are not only good or not only evil, but in their nature there is a mixture of good sides, which are normally the external sides of human beings, and an internal side which is, on the contrary, completely different, as you can imagine. But at the same time, this title and this story is also a metaphor of Victorian society. Why? Because, as you remember, Victorian society was an age of great contrasts, of great hypocrisy on one side, and on the other side, the appearance was really considered as something very, very important. So the hypocrisy of considering appearance more important than real situation. He also wrote other works, but you won't be asked to remember. We just read Just to Know, Kidnapped, or Master and Ballantree, okay, and also short stories which are worth to be read because they are really, really nice. As for the main idea of Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, about his life you just have to remember very little details. If you have your book, you see that on your book you have just a very short paragraph dedicated to his life. Also because, first of all, because it was quite uneventful, because as I told you, he spent most of his life sick, and the only important element is that his family had a great influence on his writing style, on his ideas, and he didn't like his family, as he didn't like Victorian age. His family in particular, because the members of his family were very, very oppressive and strict, very, very religious, so their rules imposed to this guy were really unbearable. But let's go to the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The story is very, very simple, and if you want to read, if you are interested in reading the story, you can also read it in Italian if you want, or in English, because it is extremely simple language, and it is also very short, so you don't need so much time to read it. We have Mr. Utterson, who is a lawyer, as you can see on the slide. And he's got a friend called Harry Jekyll, okay, who is the main protagonist, the main actor in this story. The scientist, so this Mr. Jekyll, Dr. Jekyll, is convinced that human nature is double, and he decides, as well as Frankenstein, he decides to find a way to make a potion, to create a potion in order to be able to release the internal side of his personality. So he's convinced that inside himself, as well as inside all the human beings, there is another man, we can say, there is another person, completely different. So he goes on with his experiments, and he finally is finally successful, because he finds a potion that, drunk, is able to release the internal side of his personality. And here is the introduction of Mr. Hyde. These two beings are completely different, so they, as you can see, they are in struggle, because Mr. Hyde is a murderer, also is aggressive, is violent, is a primitive man, while Dr. Jekyll is a very respectable doctor. His main aim is to help people. So they are in struggle, and Hyde, while at the beginning we see in the story Hyde is shorter, is a stocky man, so he's quite fat, muscular man, but is shorter, and is, we can say, he can be dominated by Dr. Jekyll. With the passing of time, with the appearances of these men, he grows stronger, okay, so he starts to dominate Dr. Jekyll. So when Dr. Jekyll realizes that he's no more able to dominate and to go back to his original nature, he decides to commit a suicide in order to kill the monster together with himself. Okay, so the story is very, very easy. Okay, what is the setting? It is very important because the setting is the typical Victorian age setting. So we have the city, the main setting is, well, London is very difficult to say that it is London because some aspect in the city are typical of London. In some moment we get the impression of being in Edinburgh. So also in the choice of the city we have the duplicity, because the typical theme of this story, as you can imagine, is the double, okay, the main, the greatest. Then in the city we have the presentation of the West End, which is respectable, okay, with very rich people living there, respectable women and men, and the East End, which is made up of slums, okay, so it is the worst place of the city. So again, the double aspect of a city, the respectable city and the negative city. And also in the house of Dr. Jekyll we find duplicity, because the main facade of the house, the main entrance of the house is particularly refined, wide, with a lot of windows, respectable in the appearance, while the backside of the house is with no windows, so it is dark. It is neglected. It is the typical house we would expect to find in a slums. So we have duplicity also in this aspect, and we have, on the contrary, all the same, a different setting in time, because we can say the crimes happen at night, okay, so we have the setting of the night is used for crimes, for the appearance of Mr. Hyde, while the presentation of the characters of the doctor and the lawyer and the other friends, respectable friends, is during the daylight. So also in this aspect we have a duplicity, a double theme. Then we have a very important element, which is the multi-narrative structure, okay? So instead of having the single narrator, the omniscient narrator we have met with Dickens, the typical omniscient narrator you've probably studied with Manzoni. Here we have different points of view. This is a very modern attitude. We also found it in in Frankenstein. Okay, so it is the same characteristic, and you can also during the test you can also include or recall the idea of Frankenstein. So we have the point of view of Utterson, okay, and it is the detective in this story, because he tries to investigate and find out the truth about the story of his friend. Enfield, who is a relative, he tells Utterson a terrible story about a man trampling a child, so he tells what he witnessed at night. So he is a minor character from this point of view, a minor narrator. Then we have Dr. Lanyon, who is we can say a doctor, again a colleague of Dr. Jekyll, and he describes his experience when he witnesses the transformation of Jekyll in Mr. Hyde. And finally we have Dr. Jekyll, who at the end of the novel tells the story from his point of view. So he concludes also with a letter, okay, in which he tells the origin, what happens before. So there's a very short flashback to the very beginning of the story. This is positive, remember, because when you have more than one narrator, you can make a better comprehension of the story, a better idea of what happens. Okay, the language, as I told you, is very simple and clear. So if you decide to read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it is not a difficult novel. And sources. Okay, let's talk about sources if it works. Okay. It is more or less the same as in Frankenstein. If you remember, they say that Frankenstein was originated by a dream, okay? And also in Dr. Jekyll we have the probable origin in a dream, okay? And probably he had also, because Stevenson had very frequent problems of high temperature because of his illness, and he probably had a nightmare, and from this nightmare it took inspiration to write his story. So the origin, but in this story we see also some Gothic aspect. When we introduced the Gothicism with Frankenstein, I told you that Gothic stories have never finished, okay? So they are still alive in our contemporary society. So Gothicism is something that started in that period but never ended, okay? So we have also Gothic aspect in this story. And there is also the Calvinism of his family, because the Calvinist religion is convinced that in human nature there is a double nature, there is a double identity, positive and negative, and the main challenge for human beings, sfida, is to be able to dominate and to make the better side be the dominating one. And the other, so you see that there are the arrows, okay, they are very useful. Then there are many influences and interpretations. Why Darwin's? We study Darwin's because, as you remember, Darwin's talked about the evolution of human beings. And in fact, if you had the opportunity to read the description of Mr. Hyde, at his first appearance, when he's firstly released from Dr. Jekyll, you would notice that he's very, very similar to the drawings made by Darwin in describing the origins of human beings. Okay, so the primitive men, according to Darwin's, were very similar in the aspect. Then there is also the influence on Faust, okay, Why Faust? Because Dr. Faust, in exchange of knowledge, gave to the devil his soul. Why in this sense? Because Dr. Jekyll is perfectly aware that he's trying to do something which is a challenge, which is an overcoming human nature. And even if he's perfectly aware, he risks his life. He risks his we can say is incolumitity. Okay, so and it is also a reflection of art, because we can say that art as work of art are a kind of journey into the real identity of human nature. Okay, so we have many different interpretations in this novel, and you can also give yours. Okay, you have to be free to give yours. You have to say, in my opinion, or I think that, but it is possible for you to express your own idea. So you see that the main theme is duplicity, the double nature of human beings, okay, good and evil, okay, because you see Jekyll is a respectable man. You see he's handsome in the description, his hands are white, his body is large and harmonious. So you see that the description is the typical stereotype of the perfect man and the perfect Englishman, while Hyde is described as pure evil. Okay, is pale, dark and hairy, peloso, dwarfish and deformed, quindi nano e deformato. So you see that there is the typical idea in the two characters, the typical conviction, human conviction, that what is nice is good, what is evil, what is ugly is also evil. Okay, and you know that it is not true. Okay, so we say that the typical conviction of human beings is presented in this novel. Okay, so we have finished, and that's all. One more thing I wanted to tell you is you have to write down, because there is something more I wanted to tell about the characters. In this novel, we have the complete absence of women, okay? We have just one woman, who is the wife of Mr. Utterson, but she just appears in the novel for a few pages and she disappears. So this is a male novel, as Victorian society was a male society, a masculine society. And this has to be underlined, because it was a kind of criticism that Stevenson wanted to address to Victorian society. The other criticism is that in this novel the only social class presented is middle class society. So we have two doctors, one is a scientist, also a lawyer. Okay, so all the people presented here and main protagonists are respectable, belong to the middle class society. So it seems as if Victorian society didn't have any other social class. And these are two very important elements, because Stevenson criticized Victorian society, criticized the conviction that what is good is also nice, what is evil is also negative, what is evil is also ugly. He criticized that women didn't play an important role in society, criticized that society was mainly based on the we can say the needs, the attitudes of the middle class society. Okay, so it was, even if we may think that this novel is a kind of exaltation of Victorian society, it is on the contrary a complete criticism. And Dr. Jekyll represented in Stevenson's mind Victorian society, which was apparently good, while Hyde was his real identity, which was hidden, but we can say a reality, an existence. Okay? Right. I hope I was clear. If you have any more questions, get ready to make the questions in class. Thank you.